Okay, we're going to go back through the angle relationship vocabulary, and I'm going to give a little more explanation. So first, let's look at vertical angles. Vertical angles happen when two lines cross. Okay, so we need to have two lines crossing. And what happens is our angles that are opposite from each other are congruent. Those are vertical angles. So vertical angles are across from each other. That means 2 and 4 could also be considered vertical angles. Even though they're laid out horizontally, that's not, that doesn't matter. We're looking for two lines crossing. Opposite angles are going to be congruent. So underneath your picture somewhere, we're going to say angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Now to write congruent, we put an equal sign, like a little wave symbol. It looks like a little curvy N or an enye if you've ever written anything in Spanish. A lot of times this goes over a letter. So 1 and 3 are congruent. So if two lines cross, opposite angles will be equal. That also means that angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. Now, all these terms you're going to learn are going to help us identify angle measurements, solve a lot of, angle issues by knowing these different rules. All right, adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are just two angles next to each other that share an endpoint and one of these rays. So because this is shared, these two would be adjacent. Next up, supplementary angles. Please make sure that your notes say supplementary and 180 degrees. So when we take our two angles, we have angle 7 right here and angle 8 right here. We have a perfectly straight line here. There's no bend. Straight lines are 180 degrees. So I could say angle 7 plus angle 8 equals 180 degrees. Make sure you write this little math statement down. Okay, now complementary angles. Make sure your next page, that the part that matches this illustration, says complementary and 90 degrees. So we know it's 90 degrees because we see this right angle symbol. So angle 9 plus angle 10 is going to add up to 90 degrees. Angle 9 plus angle 10 equals 90 degrees. Now, complementary and supplementary should be reviewed from 7th grade. Our next vocab word is a transversal, a line that intersects through two or more lines, creating multiple angles. So the key is two or more lines. There are times where you'll see an illustration and you will have to identify which of these lines is the transversal. You can always tell because it's the line that goes through two other lines. Transversal. Each of these lines don't go through each other. They only go through once here. They can't be the transversal. It's got to be the line that goes through two or more others. All right. Now we start getting into some more of the advanced angle relationships. says, when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. Okay, so here's our transversal. And these two lines are parallel. Okay. So when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, corresponding angles are the angles in matching corners. Corresponding angles are congruent. So if you look at this, because my lines are parallel here, that means that they're going at the same steepness. Okay, so these lines have the same steepness. So when my transversal cuts them, everything becomes equal in their matching positions. So do you see how B is in the upper right corner? F is in the upper right corner of this section. So if I look at these separately, if I look at, this top section on its own, B is in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, if I look at just the bottom section on its own, F is in the upper right corner. Okay, if I were to pick up this section and lay it right on top of this section, they would match up perfectly. Okay, so my corresponding angles are always congruent. B corresponds to F. Angle B is congruent to angle F. D is in the bottom right corner. H is in the bottom right corner. So angle D is congruent to angle H. A is in the upper left. E is in the upper left. Angle A is congruent to angle E. And then we have C bottom left, G bottom left. Angle C is congruent to angle G. Definitely add these statements to your illustration so that you can see. The other thing, if you have different color pencils or markers or anything like that, I would label the matching angles so that you can visually see what coordinates and what corresponds. All right, now the next two are very similar. We have alternate interior angles. Angles on the inside of the parallel lines, but on opposite sides. Alternate interior angles are congruent. Make sure this says interior to match our interior. So first thing, we are looking at the inside. Interior. So we're looking at the interior of our illustration here. So if I look at the interior, I'm looking at opposite angles. They're on opposite sides. They're on alternating sides of the transversal. And when you look at these, actually, do you see how angle C is acute? And so is angle F. I don't need to measure them if I'm told that these lines are parallel. If these lines are parallel, I can trust that these two inside acute angles are equal, that angle C is congruent to angle F. Same thing goes for these two obtuse angles. Do you see how E is obtuse and so is D? Because they're coming from parallel lines getting cut by this transversal, I can assume that angle E is congruent to angle D. I almost said equal. Equal's the same thing, but congruent is the word we use in geometry. Okay, now with our alternate exterior angles, we're looking at angles on the outer side, that's exterior, outer side of the parallel lines, still on opposite sides. That's alternate. Alternate exterior angles are congruent. So we're looking on the outside here, but we're still taking our opposite or alternating angles. And if I look here, do you see how B is an acute angle? And so is G. Because they're on opposite sides, both on the outside, we know they are congruent. because of the alternate exterior angles rule or theorem. Now my A is an obtuse angle, and so is H. Because they're on opposite sides of the transversal, they're both on the outside, I can say angle A is congruent to angle H. So there is a lot happening here if we look at everything. So for our examples, we're going to jump over to example number 4. Example 4 says, give one pair of supplementary angles and one pair of vertical angles. Okay, so let's look at supplementary first. Supplementary angles, it's going to be an angle plus another angle equaling 180 degrees. Or they add up to a straight line. Okay, so we have a ton of straight lines here. I have a straight line here. I have a straight line here. I have a straight line here. Pick one. Okay, let's pick this line. So take your pencil or pen and darken this line. So what we're looking for was supplementary angles. Adjacent angles are angles right next to each other, and the two angles that are next to each other create a straight line. Well, what two angles make this line? Well, angle 1 plus angle 2 makes this straight line, right? So I could say angle 1 and angle 2. Could I also say angle 4 and angle 3? Those two add up to 180 degrees, right? You have so many options. Pick two angles that when made adjacent here, see how 2 and 1 share this side? Let me make this a little more clear. Angle 2 and angle 1 make a straight line. So write down supplementary. We're going to say angle 2 plus angle 1. And I guess we don't even need the plus. We can just say angle 2 and angle 1. Create supplementary angles. You could have also said 6 and 8, 5 and 7, 8 and 7. There's a million different options. Then we need a pair of vertical angles. Okay. Now vertical angles, if we go back to our instructions, we're looking at two lines crossing. If I can find where two lines cross, angles that are opposite from each other are vertical. I'll do this in a different color for you. So let's focus on two lines crossing. We'll do these two. Two lines cross. Now vertical angles are opposite angles, and the opposite angles are going to be equal to each other. Oh, look, there's two opposite angles. Angle 6 and angle 7. They're opposite, which means they're vertical. You could have also said 8 and 5 were opposite angles or vertical angles. 2 and 3 could be vertical. 1 and 4 could be vertical. There are 4 different options that you could have had. Okay, not too bad. Number 5, give a pair of corresponding angles. There's a bunch of other stuff, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so corresponding angles mean that if I were to pick up and plop down, my angles would match up perfectly. Now, it is kind of hard to tell if we have a parallel situation here. It doesn't really look parallel to me, but because it's being asked for corresponding, I'm just going to assume that these two lines are parallel. They don't look like it to me. You're probably questioning that too. But you wouldn't be asked for corresponding angles, usually if they weren't giving you something that was parallel. Okay, so for corresponding, this is where we match up coordinating angles. What I mean is, like if I took this intersection and plopped it on top of this intersection, which angles would match up perfectly or line up? So like 3 and 7 are coordinating or corresponding angles. 2 and 6, 1 and 5, 4 and 8. Okay. So you can pick any set you would like, but I'm going to say angle 3 and angle 7. Okay, so the next set we need are alternate exterior angles. Okay, so now we're looking at the outside. Now, when we're looking at interior, exterior, do you see how 2 and 1 and 7 and 8 are on the outside of the illustration? Those are our exterior angles. Remember, alternate means opposite. So we would be looking at 2. If I pick 2, well, 2 is on the top side, 8's on the bottom side. Those are alternate, right? They're on opposite sides, and we're on the outside. So angle 2 and angle 8 would be alternate exterior angles. Because remember, 2 is on top, 8 is down on the bottom of when we compare it to the transversal. Okay, remember, for the alternate angles, we look on the each side of the transversal. Finally, a pair of alternate interior angles. So now we're looking at the inside of our illustration. That's interior. And on the interior, we're looking at opposites. So I could say 3 and 5 would be opposites. They're on alternating sides of the transversal. I could also say 6 and 4. Haven't used 6 and 4 yet, so let's go with those. All right. Going for these again. This is example 6. Give a pair of supplementary angles and a pair of vertical angles. Okay. And remember, with supplementary, we want adjacent angles, so an angle, two angles that share one side that add up to 180. So take a second and find two supplementary angles. I want you to try this one on your own. Okay, remember, with supplementary, they add up to 180. So all I have to do is look at a straight line. Well, angle 1 and angle 2 make a 180 degree line. So you could have said angle 1 and 2. You could have also said angle 3 and 4. If we looked at this line, you could have said angle 1 and 4 or angle 2 and 3. You have tons of options. If you look down here at this line, you could have said angle 5 and angle 6. Or you could have said angle 8 and angle 7. If you looked at this line, you could have said 5 and 8. Or you could have said 6 and 7. Lots of different options. Vertical. Remember that vertical angles, you want to focus on 2 lines crossing and knowing that the opposite angles are called vertical angles. So I want you to try to identify vertical angles. Okay, so we could have focused on these 2 lines that intersect, and you could have said 1 and 3 were vertical angles, or 2 and 4. If you looked at these lines that intersect, you could have said 6 and 8 were vertical angles, or 5 and 7 were vertical angles. Next up, same thing we did on example 5, we're doing on 7, corresponding angles. Okay, again, it doesn't look perfect, but we can assume that these 2 lines are parallel. Corresponding angles mean matching angles, where if I picked up these angles and dropped them on top of these angles, which angles match up? So I want you to try. Okay, so you could have seen that 5 and 7 corresponded. 6 and 8 could be corresponding. 1 and 3 could correspond. 2 and 4 could correspond. For alternate exterior, we're looking at the outside. And we need to alternate. So 1 and 8 would be alternating exterior angles. Or 5 and 4 would be alternate exterior angles. And finally, alternate interior. Looking at the inside. So take a second and see if you can figure out which are the alternate interior. Okay, so you could have said 2 and 7 because they are on each side of the transversal here. Or 6 and 3, alternate interior angles. All right, now let's take what we learned on identifying these angles and what makes what angles congruent, and we're going to do a little algebra. This is number 8. In the figure below, M angle 2, it's the same as just saying the measurement of angle 2. So this angle right here. So angle 2 measures 37 degrees. Okay. And our directions are find angle 1, angle 3, and angle 4. And you may be looking at this going, hold on, you only gave me 1. How am I supposed to find the rest? Well, we have a lot of options on how we can find the rest. Okay. Using the vocabulary you just learned is going to be huge. All right, vertical angles. Vertical angles tell us that when we have 2 lines that intersect, opposite angles are equal, right? Or congruent. So that means that angle 2 and angle 4 are going to equal each other. So if angle 2 is congruent to angle 4, then that means angle 4 is 37 degrees, isn't it? So on your notes, I want you to write this. Angle 2 congruent to angle 4. So angle 4 equals 37 degrees. I also want you to write vertical angle off to the side. Now in geometry, everything has to be proven. You have to write the properties or write the rules. So this will give you a little taste of how geometry is going to go. I want you to write vertical angles next to this statement so that we can start creating the muscle memory of what rules we're using for what. All right, so now, angle 1 and 3. If I take a look at this, I have a straight line, right? What do we know about two angles that are adjacent that make a straight line? Well, they add up to 180, right? Angle 2 plus angle 3 equals 180 degrees because of supplementary angles, right? So if angle 2 and angle 3 add up to 180 degrees, well, I know angle 2 is 37. So what plus 37 equals 180 degrees? Angle 3 equals 143 degrees. Now, if angle 3 equals 143, guess what angle 1 equals? 143 degrees. And I know that because of vertical angles. I know if they're the opposite, they're going to equal each other. And if you take a look at this for a second, if I did the math, do you see how angle 1 plus angle 4 makes a straight line? Well, if angle 4 is 37 and I want to find out angle 1, wouldn't I be doing the same exact math that I did here in the red? Yeah. So there are three key parts to this to prove how these do. All right, example 9. Two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. Suppose angle 1 is 143 degrees. Might as well just label that right now. Find angle 6 and find angle 8. Now, this one, we have a little investigating to do. There are so many different ways that you could approach this. Okay. Here's the way I would do it. If you look at 8 and 6, do you see how 8 and 6 are vertical angles? So if 8 and 6 are going to equal each other, all I have to do is find angle 8 or angle 6, and I'll be able to find the other because they're equal. So I would pick either 8 or 6. Which one do you want to find the measurement of? Let's say you want to find 8. Okay. Well, I can't do corresponding angles would mean that 1 and 5 were equal because they're in the same exact position, right? That doesn't get me 8 right away. If I look at alternate exterior, 1 and 7 would be alternate exterior, but I want 8. Well, if I know 5, could I figure out 8? I could because they're on a straight line, right? If I find 7, couldn't I figure out 8? Yeah, because it's on a straight line. So I'm not going to get straight to 8. I'm going to have to find another angle first, but it's possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, angle 1 is congruent to angle 5 because of corresponding angles. So I know that 1 and 5 will be equal to each other because of corresponding angles. I also know, because I have a straight line here, that angle 5 plus angle 8 is going to equal 180 degrees because of supplementary, right? Well, how big is angle 5? Oh, it's 143. Okay. So 143 plus angle 8 is going to equal 180 degrees. What would angle 8 end up equaling? Grab a calculator, do the math. 37 degrees. So angle 8 is 37. Now right here we said angle 8 and angle 6 are equal to each other. So that means angle 6 is also 37 degrees. And that's it. I want you to try this one completely on your own. So hit pause and do this one. All right. So you should have gotten angle 5 equals 99 degrees. And that's because of alternate interior angles. Because these alternate on the inside, they are equal to each other. So angle 5 is 99 degrees. Now, angle 5 and angle 8 are actually adjacent on a straight line. So angle 5 plus angle 8 equals 180 degrees because of the supplementary angles. Do your math and you find that angle 8 equals 81 degrees. That's it.